All right, so for the last panel today, a reminder again that we had sat down with a farmer steering committee multiple times throughout this past year to kind of gather what topics we want to talk about, what topics would be useful for the community of everyone here to hear about. And so today we have Tyler Dvorak of Fifth Season Cooperative, Ben Auerbach from Second Harvest Food Bank, and Andrew Johnston from the Willy Street Co-op. So this panel will be talking about determining crops, production planning, and pricing. And this session speaks from the buyer and distributor perspective around crop selection, planning for production, and setting fair prices. From informing which crops to grow based on markets and community needs, to developing production plans that balance labor, land, and risk. This discussion will highlight real-world approaches that work on the ground. Speakers will also explore pricing methods that ensure sustainability and profitability while remaining competitive. And so I'll throw it over to you guys. And Tyler, if you want to start with introducing yourself and letting us know what your background is, and then we'll follow through.
Sure, thank you. So I started at Fifth Season Cooperative in May of 2020. And going into the position, I was at the time growing meat lambs, and I had a sheep operation of hair sheep on my little farm, and was very interested in the local and regional food world. But I was brought into Fifth Season more as a financial position to keep the books and run the office, and work on the pricing and the finances of the organization. And COVID was a tumultuous time, and there were many accounts we were losing, new accounts we were having to get, and I just started kind of working hand in hand with the other employees at the time, more outside of the initial purview of what they hired me to do, and I was doing well at it, and we were kind of making headway. And then over these 5 or so years since, our warehouse manager had retired, and then our marketing and sales woman left, and I just eventually started doing their jobs, and we haven't backfilled those positions, and so now I'm the sole employee of the cooperative at the office there, and I run everything. And just if I make a sale, I make more work for my other 2 selves. So that's my intro, I guess.
All right, I don't know how to follow that up. That was great. My name is Ben Auerbach. I'm the food sourcing coordinator for Second Harvest Food Bank in Madison. We cover 16 counties in southern to southwestern Wisconsin, just under 300 partners that we deliver to 5 days a week. When I first started out, I've been there for 2 years. I was primarily focused on produce sourcing and produce buying. In the past year, we did just under 5 million pounds of produce distributed. Now it's kind of merged into just buying everything in general. And as I'm sure you can imagine from all the news about SNAP and everything, the past 2 weeks, coming from a long background in retail, the past 2 weeks, it felt like the day before Thanksgiving, just nonstop for 2 weeks in a row. It's been quite a thing. So one of my big joys on the job is working directly with farmers. And in the past year, I had a lot of fun with a program we called Market Harvest, where we basically went to the Wednesday Dane County Farmers Market, and didn't glean but bought leftover produce, not too dissimilar actually from the program that was starting off early this morning that we talked about first. So that's one of the great things we get to do, and a whole lot of other things too.
I'm Andy Johnston. I've been with the Willy Street Co-op for decades and have been in agriculture, I think, since I was 5 years old. I think I've held every job either on a farm or in food distribution in retail. My current role is category manager for the produce departments at Willy Street, which involves sourcing product, working with farms, setting up promotions, pricing, editing costs or auditing cost from vendors. It's actually really fun. I don't manage any people, and I love it.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for that introduction. So I just want to remind everyone that this panel will be open for questions throughout the entirety. And if anyone has any questions to start, please. Otherwise, I have some questions to guide us. Okay. So the first question that we have for you guys is, how often do you work with farmers to guide crop selection and production planning? And what does this process look like? Yeah.
Well, at Willy Street, crop selection is really not something that we often get into with farms. Most of the farms know what they're good at growing, and that's what they stick to. Typically, I think what they're looking at is what works on their soil, what works on the land for them, and for their size. I think Scott Williams had mentioned earlier a comment about potatoes. You know, if it's just two people, does growing potatoes work for you? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So we're not necessarily getting into what works well for the farm. They know that. We're more so letting them know what works well for us. Because at the same time, we want to be supporting local farms as much as we possibly can. We are a grocery store, and there's a bit of disconnect with customers or owners in the case of the co-op. When they come into our store, they look at our price of potatoes and they compare it to every other grocery store that they've been in, right? So we want to make sure that, you know, we're able to offer the farm what they need as far as cost, but also have a competitive price at the same time. So that's how it works on our end. We meet with the farms once a year. We review what we had purchased. Would they like to continue selling those items to us? If we have ideas for crops that we're looking for a source locally, we'll present it to all of the farms, usually in a conversation, sometimes in a survey, try to give them an idea of what sort of volume we'd be buying from them, and if they think that's going to work for their farm, they'll let us know. So that's about it on the co-op end of things.
Yeah, I'd say one interesting thing for buying for a food bank is that you are not necessarily buying for the customer. You're definitely buying for a patron and a guest and a client, but you're also
Can we
buying
please just slow down?
Slow down.
Sorry.
Thank
Yep.
you. Yep.
Mhm.
You're buying for that person in between who's representing where the food is going to go to. So you sometimes have to think of not just what would the guest coming to the food bank be interested in, or coming to the food pantry be interested in, but what does that food pantry, what's going to help them fill their shelves? And so for us, we found to work with farmers is to really try to fill in extra margins to give us the ability to bring in a wide variety of products around the big staples that we'll often get in more commodity kind of style things like potatoes or onions or carrots. So we found one of the ways that we can do that is to get engaged with a local farmer or a local aggregator like Scott and say, for the next 12 months, this is what we expect to actually be able to go through. It's a little bit of a high wire act, and we can get into this later maybe in terms of funding, which can often throw a food bank for a loop. But it does help that farmer or aggregator know that, hey, if I could get collards for these 3 months, that would mean a lot. If I could depend on really good premium apples for 4 months, that would mean a lot, et cetera, as the different crops grows. Otherwise, very much like Andrew, basically buying to fill where we have gaps at that moment in ways where we can't really provide that much feedback early on in terms of what gets planted or what gets done. A combination between those two.
At fifth season, we're a multi-stakeholder cooperative, which I don't think we'll take the time to get into it. But basically what that means is that both sides of any deal that we're doing could potentially be members. So our buyers and our distributors that we're selling to are also able to be members of the cooperative. They don't have to be members, but they can join. And then the producers and growers are members, and even myself as a worker is a class of membership. So the entire system is all able to have an ownership stake in that system, which is, it's a pretty interesting idea if you kind of follow through the logical process of thinking it through. But that's not really what we're talking about here, but I preface it with that to say it makes it very interesting to plan for the future when you potentially are making a contract with yourself. I don't know how else to kind of put that. And so to the best of my ability, I try to do that, but it really hasn't worked out in practice that much. A couple of success stories that we can, kind of stay positive here to talk about is I've had success planning for growers to grow like a certain variety of like ultra butternut squash for processing, and then had a buyer that before planting season had committed to 30,000 pounds or what, a full semi load of these. And then I had a couple of growers willing to go plant out some of their ground that wasn't really going to be in production to be able to harvest that. And then these were Amish growers, so they had plenty of labor available to them when the trucks came to be filled, and that was pretty successful. Low value as far as cents per pound, but overall good for the cooperative, because at a high quantity like that, there is a bit of meat on the bone still for us to make a little bit of money as a cooperative. And then the farmers were the ones who made that decision to do all of that labor at such a low price per pound, 10, 15, 20 cents a pound or whatever we ended up doing that deal at. So things like that had worked, but in general, it just tends to be what we're hearing from almost everybody. The farmers know what they're good at. They know what they enjoy growing, what they want to grow. Grow as much of it as you can, and then we're going to try to be the first ones to sell it, because nobody's exclusive with us at the moment. So if they can find somebody else that's going to buy it either earlier or for more money, they definitely take advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you, guys. Any questions so far? Okay, well, I have a follow-up question for you guys. Kind of thinking about that price point and price transparency and how you relate to farmers. What equitable practices does your organization follow for communicating that price transparency? Does that include like contract or guarantee buying for a season when working with those small producers?
I could jump off from the start here. There's actually a couple different ways that we will do it with Second Harvest Food Bank, and I think not too dissimilar for other institutions of our type. And that is that we often have different types of buying where there'll be different types of communication in terms of being open. One thing, for instance, our market harvest program, where we were at the market for 26 weeks, we started off that whole season with a pre-published list of what we would pay per item. It was like 90 items long. Each item already had a price per pound. Some of it was built through farmer feedback in the prior seasons. We're always doing surveys and getting collected feedback. So that's one way to just have that complete transparency. One thing with food banking is that, at least in our case, all the produce we're distributing is free. Like no partner that's getting it is paying for it. So we don't need to be, besides making a budget, we don't need to be concerned about, how something might cost on the end. So it really does free us to figure this out. Another version would be something where we basically do contract, similar to what you've heard other people talk about today, where we do contract for X amount of food over a season. And this could be a small contract from 2,500. It could be larger, all the way up to 30,000, somewhere in that kind of range. And through that contract, we'll set presets of, hey, we need X amount of pounds over this time. If you can't meet this because, hey, might be drought, might be terrible weather, maybe you have horrible staff issues, who knows? Then you can sub it with a different product. There could be other variations like that. And then finally, at the end of the year, we kind of close it off and say, hey, we've bought that contract with you. Through the contract, we actually start off trying to give our farmers a boost by paying out half of it at the beginning of the year. And that's to aid in planting, to aid in seeds, to aid in staff, et cetera, et cetera. And then as the end of the year goes, slowly pay it out to finish the contract. I don't want to put someone on the spot here, but we actually have someone in this room who's part of our program for that last year, or this past year, I should say. And it's a really interesting, different way to do purchasing rather than through an aggregator or rather than at the markets.
Thank you. Yeah. Man, I wish we could all function that way and didn't have to worry about buying at the end. Andrew or Tyler, do either of you have anything to say to that question?
You know, at the Willy Street Co-op, our cost is pretty much determined by the farm. So historically, farmers set their price, and how they do that, I don't know. I think a lot of it is conversation with other farms. And again, you know, we're not buying semi-loads. We contract, we call it an agreement, where we will commit to buying a specific product from a specific farm when they have that product available. If they don't have that product available, other farms will support those other farms if they have it available locally. But, you know, I think on our end, it provides the farm somewhat of assurance of what their expectations of us are, what we'll be purchasing, give or take, weekly from that farm. And the co-op, we are not, you know, we don't get grants. We are a for-profit business. We budget for 1% profit on our annual budget. So there's not a lot of room in there for error. That provides us a level of efficiency when working with local farms. Currently on our list right now, we have 3 regional vendors and 25 local farms that we're working with. So, and that we have 3 retail locations and a kitchen facility. There needs to be a roadmap for those individuals, for those buyers who are working with the farms, so that we can do that efficiently, support the farm, and still stay in business.
Thank you. Yeah. Tyler, anything on your end?
About pricing?
Yeah, or, you know, just what goes into how you communicate, you know, what on the 5th season end.
With the transparency and
Yeah.
whatnot. I think folks might find it interesting that when I first got to 5th season Cooperative, our current president at the time was maybe driving this, but just overall how the Cooperative was formed and the folks involved, it was an extremely transparent cooperative. And I've actually worked over the past 5 years to try to fix that a little bit, because it was transparent to a fault, in my opinion. There was a lot of kind of unnecessary angst being caused amongst the farmers and their families, and based upon where their products were going and what price it was being sold for at those end places. And then maybe somebody else got paid more for the same vegetable on a given week or something. And it's too complex of a system to be able to have everybody see their perspective of the system and have everybody be happy. The system itself is happiest if all those little parts and pieces have a little bit of a veil that they can't quite see everything, because nobody has the whole picture. And if they would have the whole picture, then they would see how it came to be that they got $1 less per pound they have to trust the cooperative, myself operating, our buyers like a little bit, that the price ended up where it was in a kind of a faithful way. So I don't hide things, but I don't specifically make a point to inform every farmer what the other guy got paid. And it's worked like a lot smoother that way. And I think it ends in us trying to pay the highest price, because the cooperative, we set margins. So I can't sell products at a margin beyond where we've agreed upon in a given pool that it has to be set. And so if I sell somebody's product for a little bit less, then they're going to get paid less. But it may be something that gets us future sales, and they're going to be selling more volume that they wouldn't have sold if I wouldn't have made that sale.
Right.
So I don't tie myself to, well, I sold the product for X price last week, like at a fixed pricing scenario. If a buyer wants to buy that product the following week, but for less, I kind of have to make the sale if the sale's in front of me.
Yeah.
And a lot of those buyers are part of our cooperative. So I have to trust them as a member of the cooperative that they're not taking advantage of us. And so it's kind of a trust-based thing.
Yeah. I
don't know.
feel like
It's difficult things to think about, but I try to not turn down sales just because our price isn't being met.
definitely. And I think, throughout this entire day, we've been thinking and talking about how like the variability of price just it's ever changing, and people like you as an aggregator and farmers alike have to constantly adapt to that. And I think what you're also getting at is like no one can see the full picture of all of the entire system and all of the logistics that go behind. And so seeing parts of it and taking it for maybe just not fully understanding what it is, and those feelings of upset, I think it's really important to cultivate that trust. So yeah, thank you guys. Kind of switching over, unless we have any questions right now in the crowd in regards to price transparency and that kind of stuff. Yes. Okay, great.
Real straightforward. Tyler, who are Fifth Season's primary buyers?
Most of our volume goes to big distributors like Cisco and Performance Foods by a tonnage dollar value type of a situation. But we have a number of smaller relationships that I've tried to cultivate with, I guess, like CSAs or farm stores that need to shore up their production by buying, other good, relatively local organic produce. So I do a bit of that. And then we have schools and hospitals that buy our IQF frozen products mostly. But that's pretty much where it goes. And those big distributors, just to touch back on the pricing, I would have to pay a monthly, like $700 a month or something, to find out where our products are going and in the end. And so they build in this secrecy as well. And they say it's for our own good too. And there's very interesting system to be a part of.
Yeah. Any questions from the crowd? Any other questions right now? Cool. So kind of going back to that, what you're saying with working with big distributors and thinking about like market positioning, maybe Ben, you can't speak to this so much, but how do you manage that premium price that comes with buying local? And yeah, what priorities do you set forth in your organization so you can continue to support and buy locally? And maybe Andrew, you can speak to this as well.
I don't know. It's really, I think it's interesting. I have been in, retail for years, and we have heard COVID brought up multiple times, and there has recently been a lot of inflation, cost of labor, and You know, I think that the co-op is fortunate in that our owners, our customers, you know, they place a high value on locally produced, locally sourced goods. But what's the ceiling? That I don't know, you know. And personally, over the years, you know, my opinion is that local, for those of you who aren't familiar with Willy Street, you know, our priority is organic and local organic. Um, but I just, you know, I really don't know. I don't know. I think that they're, for costs to become, maintain their competitiveness with, to some degree, of standard conventional grocery stores, there may be some changes that are necessary in the future. You know, and I think Tyler, 5th season, that might be part of the solution.
Yeah, definitely.
Hard to say.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about, I'm sorry, Tyler, if you want to speak to this, but Ben, I was saying maybe you can't, but I think maybe you can too, just thinking about, you know, those limited grants that you do get and how you decide, you know, like what makes sense even with that higher price point, you know.
Yeah, I do absolutely remember, especially from my time working for a company which collectively was known as Whole Paycheck, like knowing what you would price something at and knowing that that kind of increase you had to do for a local product was a tough thing. For that company, the answer was to blend it with other items. But that doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but it can be a very tough thing in terms of how to price that local thing. For me, I value it because when I go shop at Willy Street, and I do and I love it, I'll buy TP carrots all year round until they run out, and then I'm not interested in the California carrots. Like that's why I shop at Willy Street, right? So at least there's like a customer that you can imagine, like who's going to drive that and can value what that cost might be. For us, a couple different ways. One thing with grant purchasing is that you need to have an organization that's strong enough to think of the value behind that grant purchasing that goes past the simple pounds that you can bring in and distribute. So for Second Harvest, it was really important that we saw the value of having local product, having that higher nutritious product rather than the big bulk commodity stuff we could bring in, and making sure that that would always be an underlying part of what we have, no matter the grant kind of situation. So for instance, right now, we have very little access to grants at the moment. Most everything local I'm buying is just purely out of our general kind of fundraising or what other kind of access to funds that we have, not through specified grants. But you need to keep some part of that going because it's important to have that food flowing out so you have access to those partners and those aggregators. So when those funds do come, and they do come at different times, you're able to almost flip a switch and jump back in and be like, great, let's ramp this back up. And now we can really get this buying going again and again. Not the easiest thing to hear if you're a farmer. You want that reliability year to year, but still having those relationships at least so you can have that kind of process of being able to turn the switch. In terms of pricing, that also freed us up, Paulina, because we got away from thinking, well, with this grant, let's buy the highest amount of pounds we could, and started thinking, how can we put this money back in the community? A lot of our farmers, this wouldn't surprise any of you, are clients at some of our food pantries, right? So it made sense for us to actually make sure to pay a living amount that would be useful for them to have and to depend on, whether it's through an aggregator or through direct. And so we saw value as to why we might pay 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pounds per pound of what it would be for a giant truck of carrots coming out of Quebec or something.
Yeah, thank you. And Tyler?
I think I can maybe give one general idea that maybe people can just marinate on, and then one very specific example where it helped our co-op and our members. So the general idea is thinking about this local premium pricing that we're talking about, and trying to flip it on its head a little bit and think about how could we provide a local discount. And I kind of started thinking about this because the world I came from before fifth season, I was consulting with grazers in the Southwest Wisconsin and working with kind of like grass-based farmers, beef and lamb and those things. And a big thing I would be trying to get across is that these organic rotational grazers, they're the low-cost producer. They have way less inputs. They can produce more pounds of an animal on less acres of land, and land is getting very expensive. And so I was pushing some of these grazers to try to grow their volume, lower their prices, and get competitive with the national meat prices. And that I thought it could be a way they could be successful, and we had some success in that. So I brought this to fifth season, and we looked at what products do we offer that are not going to be hit by inflationary forces as much. And we kind of took maple syrup as an example, and we just have a couple of maple syrup growers, or at least we did, and they said, well, we harvest our own wood, we boil the sap down over a wood fire in our sugar shack here, that we just don't have much input cost whatsoever. And if we're doing gallon glass bottles, those bottles are getting a little bit more expensive, and there are some things that are increasing, but in general, our cost of production hasn't changed. And I looked, and we hadn't raised the cost of our maple syrup by the gallon to Performance Foods, which was Reinhardt Foods, but one of our big buyers of that, since about 2015. So 5 years, 6 years before we started having this conversation. And I said, over the next few years, let's keep this exactly the same where it is. And let's watch all the rest of the maple syrup and the Performance Foods catalog keep going up month after month after month. And let's see what it does for our sales. And we have a member of Performance Foods on our board, and so I had a little bit of insight into seeing the catalog and what costs were and what was going to be happening. But to just end the story with the specific result, at that time when we had that conversation with our syrup growers, we were buying about a flat pallet of gallons, which is 30 gallons of maple syrup, once a month. And I was switching back and forth between the two growers each month. And this past month, we sold 7 pallets of maple syrup in 1 month. And I'm not only buying from each of those 2 growers each month, but they've had families in their community start producing maple syrup to be able to get the volume that we need. And going forward next year, they're going to be producing more volume, and it's just been growing. And they're happy with the price. And I said, if we keep the price the same for the next 10 years, and you have 10 more families in your community that are producing this Amish organic maple syrup, that's a win for us. And that local discount has kind of been a successful tool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so cool how, in the aggregator kind of like bird's eye view, you can see that and advocate for them and push for them to kind of keep doing that work that'll allow those prices to stay competitive while also benefiting the farmers. Thank you. Any questions from the crowd at all? Yeah.
This is probably a question mostly for Andrew. I visited the Viroqua Food Co-op and the Menominee Food Co-op in Eau Claire somewhat recently, and they do a really great job of having big advertisements or posters, information about the farmers that they are selling products from. Because buying local, if you are paying a premium for it, I mean, it's most oftentimes for a lot of people a values decision. And I think that when those values are celebrated and marketed and part of the decision making that you're doing at the grocery store, more people may be inclined to make those choices. So I'm wondering if there are any strategies that the Willy Street Co-op uses to kind of do some consumer education around what buying local means for food dollars staying in our communities, for land being stewarded in most oftentimes a better way, etc.
Yes. Yeah, there are. I think a lot of that falls more under our owner services. They do a lot of outreach with our producers beyond produce, right? Because we're working with meat producers, soap, every product you can imagine that is produced locally, you're going to find it at Willy Street. So yes, they are doing that work, and throughout our store, I believe it's called It's not Know Your Maker. Can't remember what it is for sure. Yeah, I wish, but it's not. It might be Know Your Producer. They've got posters up above the coolers, all throughout the store of all the different farms and producers that we work with who are local. So, but they do also, I can't remember like the details, but they break down for every dollar that's spent on a local item at your co-op, X% of that stays in the community versus an item that was not produced locally. So yeah, they do that work.
Cool.
Yeah, I think
Any other questions?
education is a huge component, right? Because it is, we're a business. We want to grow. We want new customers. And for those individuals not familiar with local food systems, we want to be the impetus of that education. Like, here it is. It's right in front of you.
Yeah, thank you. Any more questions? I'll go here first and then I'll go that way.
I have a question for Ben. As someone who does procurement at a food bank, especially nowadays, knowing that food banks are operating with extremely limited funding to buy food, how do you start to prioritize what purchases you're going to make local?
Great question. I'll say it's definitely a fluid situation where, for instance, a month ago we thought we would be is already very different from where it is now. And our funding has already been spent in different ways than maybe our best laid budget could have presumed. We start off, at least in the food bank world, with kind of we call them hard seven produce items that we need to make sure we have no matter what. It doesn't mean I don't buy those locally, but I can buy more locally if I'm buying those hard seven usually from the big or frankly agribusiness kind of places, because it opens up more funding by all the cost savings in that to buy from the other kind of areas. The other part of that is to make sure you have leadership that you are basically selling as to the value of that local produce at all times, because you need to make them understand that is not just the straight bang for your buck on pounds per dollar, or dollars per pound, I should say, but the value of everything else that comes with it. And part of that is almost kind of a rallying cry for all of our farmers here. Like, the value you bring to places and institutions with your ability to go and talk about product or to be involved in, like, for instance, Scott has literally gone to grant applications seminars for us to kind of say, hey, Second Harvest can distribute stuff. I'm sure this Kyle from Hungry Task Force could tell a very similar story for many of the people they work with. Like, that's immense kind of value. And that's important, not just to the people making the decisions, but frankly to people that are being voted into office. They want to know that that money is being spent locally. So there is a lot of value for that. But it's just continuing to get the biggest bang for your buck of the real basics so you can spread yourself thinner in all the other areas and do the things that really kind of have good return for what people want, rather than just, here's a potato. Potatoes are great, by the way. I don't mean anything bad by that.
Any other questions? I think I saw, yes.
Can any of you make comments about the Amish produce auctions and Fenimore and others? Do you buy from them, and what's been your experience? We talk a lot about trying to get the price up for the farmer and the farmer being able to pay their employees a living wage, and I see that as a counter trend, I guess.
It's been something that we feel has directly reduced the volume of produce we sell every year. So it's been a negative for fifth season cooperatives business to lose business to the produce house, these auction houses. What happens is fifth season is smaller. Many of our growers are Organic Valley members, and they're buying the vast majority of the volume that they produce. And then because they're producing all of this product for Organic Valley, they have a bit of excess, and then I can get a hold of that. And so that's the relationship I have. But it's harder to deal with me and have me find a market and be selling through me than it is to just take your excess that you didn't sell to Organic Valley and just bring it to the auction house. So we've seen a bit of a loss there, as well as we're having a number of our members drop their organics certifications because of the expense and time, and finding that it's just easier for them to bring their produce right to the auction house, take the price of the day, move on with their lives. No organic cert, no, really just they're valuing their time. And so I've gotten letters from growers that said, sorry, we're leaving the cooperative. We dropped our organic cert. I'm just bringing everything to the auction house. So they've been a negative to our system, but that's a farmer making a decision for their family, and they want to do that instead. So it's not really for me to judge whether it's good or bad, in the world.
Thank you, Tyler. Any other questions from the crowd? I've got a few questions left on my paper. Yeah, okay. I guess a follow-up to that, thinking about like organic certification and what that means, at Willy Street Co-op, for example. Is it exclusively organic produce that you guys buy? And then follow up, like, is there any push for, advocacy for these small farmers who may not be able to afford the certification, but are essentially, doing these organic practices? Has there been any kind of like movements towards that?
We do work with a few farms who are not certified organic, and typically those are on products that there just aren't organic growers. I think an example right now would be, we work with 2 organic apple orchards, and they've had a couple rough years in a row here. We don't have any local organic apples at the moment. We work with a grower out of Door County. They use integrated pest management, so they are not certified organic, but we're selling their product.
Okay.
Lots of it. Do we advocate for those growers? Not so much. It's complicated, right? I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are, why would I get certified organic? My practices are superior. I'm using biodynamic. I'm not biodynamic certified. I'm incorporating integrated pest management and organic methods. Maybe they're doing fine through markets other than Willy Street Co-op with that strategy. But I think when we talk about food safety, things like that, I don't know. There's some benefits that come with that organic certification. At least, I think both for the grower and the retailer.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions in the crowd? Yeah.
I guess I have a similar question to the last one, and that's like, at what point do you find it's your responsibility to, Tyler, you kind of brought it up with like the auction houses, but like to advocate for growers that choose to use better labor practices. You're going to have a cheaper product if somebody's not paying their labor or has like very, just shitty labor practices. So it's like, At what point is that your responsibility? At what point is that policy's responsibility? What shapes policy? Is it our consumer and production practices coming out of this room? How do you guys look at that?
If I could jump in it from the start, and it's kind of a hard metric and a soft metric. A hard metric is we actually have a spreadsheet where you can basically, for vendor to vendor, we can kind of grade where they're at in different ways, including um, employee wages to employee treatment to are they Wisconsin, et cetera, et cetera. Those are very useful when we have access and the ability to buy from a wider variety of vendors and farmers. The softer metric is simply remembering that we need to be buying from vendors and farmers that have the same values as us. I mean, it's all part of not just building a strong food system, but for us, to addressing food insecurity. Like it means so much more to buy locally and from the local farmers and from local farmers that are doing a great job with their employees and with having a sustainable business than it would for us to just bid on some random truck passing through Wisconsin or something. That's basically how it bubbles down in terms of second harvest. And for not all, but for many food banks, a very much similar kind of a ethos for that.
It's a tough question, Sam. I think as a cooperative that I can speak for fifth season and where we draw our membership from in the region, and the process that we have does involve a bit of the one thing is we make farm visits to our farms, and we have our own kind of internal auditing that goes on with the practices of our farms. So myself, I'm a board member as well, and I can speak for the other board members. I know that if we felt that we had a member farm that was an unethical farm by however our standards, where it would meet that threshold, it would even become a conversation piece that we would likely just cease doing business with them. So there's kind of an internal check within the cooperative there. But those kind of judgment calls are kind of difficult to make. And then maybe just an overarching, I can end my statement with saying, I used to have a 5-county region where I would visit farms when I was working with the RC&D in the region, and as well as now visiting a lot of produce farms and just having neighbors. I've seen organic produce growers farms who have a number of acres in organic produce production, but then the rest of their farm is continually grazed by horses, nipping it down to the dirt with eroded streams and terrible ecological conditions on the total of their acreage. And then I've seen neighbors who are conventional corn and bean farmers with grass waterways and lots of their tillable land in CRP with managed woodlands and doing an exemplary job of land stewardship. And so it's even difficult at the organic conventional level to say who is running a farm by better practices. It's really tough stuff.
Cool. All right. I do feel I have a pretty important question, and I saved it for the end. We have about 10 minutes left. But what are you guys doing to buy more culturally relevant crops? Considering that also most people needing or utilizing culturally relevant crops are accessing through food security programs. So maybe this is a little directed towards Ben, but if the other two want to speak to it, you're welcome to as well.
Sorry for the pause. It's just kind of a vast answer, honestly, because it touches on a lot of different things with second harvest. I'll break it down a couple different ways. For us to buy culture representative things is that one thing we need to understand what the guests at the partners, the food pantries they serve, what they are looking for. We can very confidently set out and say, I'm going to buy 3 pallets worth of chayote, and I don't know if that's actually going to get distributed or ordered. It's just kind of my impression that there will be a need for that. So it starts with by talking to the buyers at each of those individual food pantries of what they're looking for. And then even better, if we can, going to those food pantries and doing surveys with the patrons that are going there to get an idea of what they are looking for as well. After that, you can kind of build a mission of here's what we are looking to add on of more culturally representative goods. There's different formats for that. For instance, answering that question for like a dry shelf stable thing is very different than a fresh produce item. If it's fresh produce, because any fresh produce thing we bring in is ordered and off in our cooler, we have 80 cooler pallet spots in our cooler, is often gone within a day of it being available online. It's usually, for me, a thing of what can I bring in that enough partners will want, that addresses a culture responsive need, that's not going to take away from that extra pallet of tomatoes that I know would have gone to. So then it becomes almost kind of like a hunt of here's what this is. And we've done small steps, not all the steps, but for instance, last year we started carrying tomatillos pretty much, I don't know, 5, 6 weeks in a row during the height of the season for them last year, which we hadn't the year before. That's one small example there. The other example is going and having, earlier I talked about those direct contracts. That's also a very, very good way. We work with one farmer who has lots of West African garden eggs. And because we know he can grow that, an amazing farmer, by the way, Sekidao, because we know he can grow that, that's what we distinctly ask him to do, because we know there's a need for that kind of product to be distributed among our service area. And it's not going to be met on some giant produce order board. It might not even be met by our aggregators because the aggregator may not have enough customers for it. So it's a combination of those two things.
Thank you. Andrew or Tyler, do you guys feel you have anything to add to that?
I think at the co-op, it's we recently opened, and by recently, the last 5, 6 years, opened a location of retail on the north side, and we were anticipating that the demographics of the neighborhood were more diverse than our east or our west location, and we took that into account with our product line. And you know, as a for-profit business, if it sells, we're going to carry it.
Right.
You know, we want to provide that service to the members of the community. And what was interesting is that over time, you know, we tracked our sales of certain items, conventional versus organic, and we've made a lot of changes. Unfortunately, in my opinion, that have weeded out a lot of those products. You know, there just wasn't enough demand, and it's a huge store, but there's the space for them, but people just weren't buying them. So,
Right. Yeah. On my way.
Andrew, just to follow up to that, do you kind of, or the co-op keeps track of the demographics that buy from the co-op? Because just thinking about, you're talking about the north side and the diversity, but also taking into account the income level of people that live on the north side and who will go and buy at the co-op.
they do on a voluntary basis. They do send out surveys to owners where there's a range for their income, ethnicity, all of that. So yeah, I mean, they are keeping track of it, but again, it's restricted to owners.
I'll say too, I doubt Andrew's going to toot his own horn with this, but as a former grocery manager, we're about 5 minutes away from the north side, Willy Street, and it's a fantastic store. I'd encourage anybody, if you have a chance, to actually go visit it real quick as you leave today. 'Cause I think it's wonderful, wonderful store, and has an amazing amount of fresh produce in it that you would not expect for a store of that size.